and the Austrian School of Economics. I wrote this paper because I was reading about the biography of Wittgenstein, and I thought that because they live in the same period of time, it should be some relation between Wittgenstein and Mises and Hayek, because they were living in Vienna at the same time, and so I started to research, and I found some very interesting things that I didn't know. But I will start. These are Ludwig von Mises, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Friedrich Hayek. They were born almost very. Wittgenstein was born in 1881, Wittgenstein in 1889, and Hayek in 1899. So they were very, very close. They lived more or less in the same period of time. So they live in a cultural environment there was a lot of relation between them. Certainly, Hayek and Wittgenstein were remote cousins, because the grandfather of Hayek and the grandmother of Wittgenstein were siblings. So they were remote cousins. Indeed, there is a paper called My Cousin Ludwig Wittgenstein. And when Hayek finished his studies with Visser in 1921, Ludwig Wittgenstein published his first book called Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus. So they were very related. And it was the Vienna in Vienna there were in that time many leading figures in different fields of science, like Brentano in philosophy, Bolzano in epistemology, Breuer and Freud in psychoanalysis, and Husserl in phenomenology. But it was not all, because there were only more figures like Kelsen with the theory pure of law, and von Baber that he had already died, Mises and Schumpeter in economics, and Ernst Mach in physics. In physics, it was created the Wiener circle, and many of the assistants to the Mises circle were assistants in the Wiener circle, the Círculo de Viena in Spanish, like Philip Kaufmann, Heifel, and Karl Menger Jr., the son of Karl Menger. They were both assistants to both seminars. And when the war started, Wittgenstein moved to England after the war, and he was related with Keynes, and he was part of the Apostolic Society. And in that time also, Hayek went to London School of Economics, and he was very fond of Popper. And indeed, it was a debate between Wittgenstein and Popper in 1946, in October 26 of 1946. And the Popper and Wittgenstein were antithetical philosophers. And indeed, in a letter that he wrote after the debate, he wrote, an ass came from London. An ass in English means a donkey. He wrote that Popper was a donkey from London. The background of Wittgenstein was that he was homeschooled until the age of 14 years old. Then started studying engineer, and when he was studying engineer in Manchester, he started reading the Bertrand Russell book, The Foundation of Mathematics. So he started also reading about Gottlob Frege, and then he went to Jena, because he asked himself if he could be a philosopher. And Gottlob Frege recommended to go to Cambridge to study with Bertrand Russell, and he studied there one course about the foundation of mathematics and other course with G. Moore about psychology. after that, he went to the war, and in the war he read the Kant, the critic of pure reason with a friend of him, and then it was very influential in his youth because of Karl Kraus and Lichtenberg and Weininger. He was a psychologist, and we can also know what were his readings, because if you read his letters, you can see that he read a lot about Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Freud, William James, and William Johnson, and he was not a religious man, but he had religious thinkings, because he also read Saint Augustine and Kierkegaard and Tolstoy, the Four Gospels. After that, he wrote his first book in the Tractatus Logicus Philosophicus, very influenced by Russell. And after that, he almost wrote nothing, only one book called Philosophical Grammar and another minor books. And then in 1953, posthumously was published Philosophical Investigation, when he realized that the ideas that he wrote in his first book were wrong, because he was wrong about that he divided the world into facts and not into things, and in the ultimate constitution of things, they thought that it was fixed, and he told it was wrong. And then, but then you can find two things that are in common in both books, in Philosophical Investigation and Tractatus, that are that the job of the philosophy is to clarify the language, and you can find that what can be said and what cannot be said in a way that is intelligible for people. After that, we go to the what was the relation with Mises. Wittgenstein was very influenced by Gottlob Frege, and Mises was indirectly related to Gottlob Frege through Husserl, because Gottlob Frege changed Husserl's mind in his book Logical Investigations, and the main point of that influence is that they believe in the truthless and universal character of logic, and they criticize psychologism, and Frege criticized also empiricism, psychologism, and historicism. But Wittgenstein went further, because he thought that illogical thought is impossible, because when you thought, you have to thought logically, because it doesn't exist a thought that it is not illogical. He said that, and it is related with Mises, because thought is an action, and the thought is purposeful, so an action is purposeful. And Mises said, always an action is always rational. And in a place he goes further, and he says, logic and the science of human action is one and the same. So he identifies logic and the human action. They also believe in empirism, in a priorism, in the synthetic a priori economic laws, because the laws of that, in that terms, they apply only to that phenomenon, and the axioms of economic science, economic praxeological science, are before any sensation, so they are apodictically certain, and they say that we have a knowledge before any sensation, and the phenomenon of of valuing, ordering our preference are based on judgment. That judgment is prior to any sensation, and in praxeologic terms, if you try to deny that the laws, you realize that you fall in contradiction. So Wittgenstein also said that a priori thoughts can be a priori thoughts, and that thoughts are ensured on themselves. There's nothing to compare that thoughts in other part. We can always talk about the concepts, and they say that Wittgenstein said that the meaning is always related to the use, because if you see some people passing things one to another, you cannot say that they are buying or selling unless you know the concepts of praxeological laws. That you have to know what is the concept of buying or selling, because the objects, the physical object, says nothing to us, and it's like Wittgenstein said that if I go to Paris and to see the standard meter, it means nothing to me if I not previously know what measuring is. So previously I have to understand what is measuring. And Mises said the same, that if you are not previously acquainted with the term medium of change, if you see a plate going through or forward, you cannot understand what is money. You previously have to know what is the concept of medium exchange, and the concepts of those concepts are like picture when you look at to understand reality. And Wittgenstein said that a concept is like a picture where you compare the objects to understand reality. So we can talk about time. The notion of time is very close what Mises said. Wittgenstein said that there are two kinds of time: the time of physics and the time of memories. And he says time is the way our memories are in the way the way the memories are ordered in our mind. And Mises in the same way, they say acting is what gives us the notion of time. So they are very, very close in their definition. And even though Wittgenstein talk about the fractional reserve banking, because there's a quote that he says, what kind of certain is that the banks won't actually be around, but although they would break if it did happen. He says that is a certainty, but it is not the kind of certainty that it was in the old times. So I think that he suggested that in the old times the banks move in the other direction. The theory of value. In a theory of value, I think he could be mentioned as a leading champion in defending the theory of subjective value, because he said, what is the value of a Beethoven sonata? The way the notes are written, and at the end he says, maybe the value is a certain state of the mind. So we can find here that like a subjective, he's defending the subjective value of the value, the subjective value. Now we can go through spontaneous orders. So before I go to economic calculation. In economic calculation, Mises said that the prices arise between when the interplay of two peoples with the subjective valuation of two people. But that is not enough. We have to have the objective exchange value in order to compare those subjective values, and that's why when the government says, or the central planning board says, I set up the prices, but that's false, because that's not the price, that's a mere number. Because prices, we know that prices arise from the comparison of subjective values, and it was only checked from outside. The checking from outside are the units, and the units are the money. We have only a checking in outside, and we can set a good phrase that if I give one hand, my left hand gives money to my right hand, is that a gift? Or that's what we could say about prices established by government. That's not a price, that's mere numbers, not really prices. And if you try to calculate for higher order goods, you always have to have a method of computation. And the method of computation is a monetary calculation that is only possible through units like money. And we go last time through this fractional reserve. There's a picture and this economic calculation. Now we go to spontaneous orders. Spontaneous orders, people who are involved in spontaneous orders, they are always subjected to rules. Maybe people don't know what that rules are, because they cannot spell that, but they are subjected to that rules, and that rules arise from the cultural tradition, and nobody create that rules. No government, no people create the rules. They arise in a customary way, like Hayek said, like law was created in a spontaneous and customary way. The language is the same, and Wittgenstein compares language with a play. That there is no plan whatsoever. We are following rules, and that is a play. He says a rule, a language, a game is an institution, and at the end he says that following a rule is a human activity. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.